The screen in front of Dr. Thorne was not just a screen, it was a window. And through that window a star was raging. It was the sun, but no one had ever seen it like this. Not this close, not this alive. Great rivers of orange and yellow plasma, each one larger than our entire planet, twisted and leaped from the surface. It was beautiful and it was terrifying. To anyone else it might have looked like chaos, but to Eris it was a complicated, violent dance, and he was slowly learning its steps. He adjusted his glasses, the fiery light from the screen dancing in their lenses. For a moment, in the quiet hum of the control room, he was perfectly happy. The room itself was a temple of silence. The only sounds were the soft clicks of keyboards and the gentle whirring of computers. This was NASA's inner sanctum, the mission control for the most daring project he had ever been a part of. The Helios Sentinel. For 10 years, this probe had been his life. He had helped design its heart, its brain, and most importantly, its shield. The Helios Sentinel was built for one purpose: to touch the sun. Not literally, of course, but to fly closer than any human-made object ever had, diving deep into the star's outer atmosphere, its corona, a place of unimaginable heat and radiation. Aris turned from the magnificent screen to look at a smaller one on his desk. It showed a simple, clean line graph, representing the data flowing back from the Sentinel. The line was mostly smooth, but his eyes were locked on a tiny, almost invisible section. There the line wavered. It wasn't a spike or a crash. It was a flutter, a hiccup, a tiny, rhythmic wobble in the probe's magnetic field readings. His team, a group of brilliant young scientists, had seen it too. They called it solar noise. Just the sun saying hello, Eris, one of them had said with a smile earlier that day. The models predicted a bit of turbulence. Eris had nodded, but he hadn't agreed. His gut, a deep, instinctual feeling he had learned to trust over 40 years of work, told him it was something else. It was the feeling of a single thread loose in a perfect tapestry. The clock on the wall ticked over to 8 p.m. The day shift had left, their laughter echoing down the hall. The night was his. This was his favorite time, when the room was empty and it was just him and the data, just him and the sun. But the silence that settled around him was a double-edged sword. In the office, it was peaceful. At home, it was different. He packed his bag, a simple leather satchel worn soft with age, and drove through the dark, quiet streets. He pulled into the driveway of a small, neat house. No lights were on inside. He opened the door and the silence there was heavier. It didn't hum like the computers. It just sat thick and still. He dropped his bag on a chair and walked over to the mantelpiece. There was a photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed a woman with kind eyes and a warm, laughing smile. Lena. It had been 2 years, but the space she left behind in the house hadn't shrunk. It was in the empty side of the closet, the quiet in the kitchen, the extra pillow on the bed that stayed perfectly fluffed. He was a genius to his colleagues, a legend in the world of astrophysics. But here in this quiet house, he was just a man who missed his wife. He made a simple dinner, the clang of the pot too loud in the stillness. This was the other part of his life, the part people didn't see, the part where the grand dance of the solar winds felt a million miles away, replaced by the much harder silence of an empty home. Later, as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, the wobble on the graph came back to him. It was like a ghost in his mind. He thought of another mission 15 years ago, a probe sent to Jupiter. He was younger then, more trusting of the perfect computer models. He had seen a similar anomaly, a tiny blip everyone dismissed. He had stayed silent. That probe had failed, lost to the intense radiation of Jupiter's magnetosphere. He had never forgotten the feeling of watching that mission fail, knowing he had seen the warning sign and done nothing. It was a quiet, private regret he carried with him always. The next morning he was back in the control room, the lack of sleep sandpaper behind his eyes. The lead mission director, a confident woman named Carla Rossi, was doing the rounds. "Data looks fantastic, people," she said, her voice full of energy. "The shield is performing beyond expectations. We're making history." Eris waited for her to reach his station. He pointed to his screen, to the tiny fluttering line. "Carla," he said, his voice calm but firm, "I think we have a problem." She leaned in, her smile not quite fading. "The wobble? We've been over this, Eris. It's within predicted parameters. It's the solar wind brushing against the shield. A gentle caress, nothing more. That's just it, Eris insisted. It's not the force of the push, it's the rhythm of it. The way it's interacting with the edge of the shield. I think it's creating microscopic stress fractures. We can't see them yet, but they're there. It's like a song that's just slightly out of tune. It will get worse. Carla straightened up, her smile now gone, replaced by a look of professional patience. Eris, your dedication is what makes you great. But we can't base a multi-billion-dollar mission on a feeling about a song being out of tune. The risk of a course correction now is too high. It would use up fuel we need for the primary mission phase. We stay the course. She gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder and moved on. Eris was left staring at the screen. He had been sidelined. His warning, his deep-seated fear born from experience and loss, was labeled as the worry of an old man, still haunted by a past failure. He looked from the raging sun on the big screen to the gentle, smiling face of Lena on his desk photo. He felt caught between two silences, the lonely one in his house and the professional one in this room where no one would listen. The Helios Sentinel, his greatest creation, was flying into danger, and he was the only one who could see the storm coming. But for now, there was nothing he could do but watch. The gentle caress. That's what Carla Rossi had called it. To Eris, sitting alone at his station after everyone had left, the words felt like a joke. There was nothing gentle about the sun. He zoomed in on the data stream from the Helios Sentinel until the tiny wobble on his screen filled his entire world. It was a pulse, a faint, irregular heartbeat. Bump, bump. Pause. Bump. It was the rhythm of a problem. He could feel it in his bones. He spent the next 3 days living in a bubble of his own worry. While his colleagues celebrated the probe's perfect health, Eris buried himself in numbers. He pulled up old mission data, ran new simulations on his private server, and compared the Sentinel's flutter to the one he remembered from the failed Jupiter mission all those years ago. The patterns were not the same, but the feeling in his gut was. He knew he needed proof. A theory wasn't enough. He needed to show them something they couldn't ignore. His chance came on a Thursday. A young engineer named Ben, a recent graduate full of bright ideas and a deep respect for Eris, was working late, fine-tuning the communication software. Ben, Eris said, pulling up a chair, I need a favor. A small one. Of course, Dr. Thorne. What is it? I want to run a low-level diagnostic on the shield's thermal sensors, just the edge ones. I have a hunch about the calibration. Ben looked hesitant. The main system shows everything as green. A separate diagnostic might flag a false alarm with the mission directors. It will be quiet, Eris said, his voice low and earnest. Just between you and me. We can run it through the secondary system. It will take 5 minutes and no one will ever know we looked. Ben saw the tired look in the older man's eyes. He saw the dedication. He nodded. Okay, 5 minutes. They ran the scan. The results came back, and for a moment Eris's heart sank. The primary thermal readings were perfect. The shield was holding. See? Ben said, sounding relieved. It's all good. But Eris wasn't looking at the temperature. He was looking at the resonance. The diagnostic showed a tiny, almost invisible vibration along the very rim of the shield, the part facing the solar wind. It was a high-frequency shiver, perfectly in sync with the magnetic wobble he had found. This was it. This was his proof. The gentle caress wasn't just pushing. It was shaking. Like a person constantly tapping a fine glass with a metal ring. Sooner or later, a crack would form. The next morning, he requested an urgent meeting with Carla Rossi and the senior engineering team. He walked into the conference room feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. He had the data. He had the evidence. He laid it all out for them. He showed them the two graphs side by side, the magnetic wobble and the physical vibration. He explained his theory, comparing it to metal fatigue in airplane wings. The shield is strong, he concluded. But this is a type of stress we never modeled. It's a tiny rhythmic hammering. If a coronal mass ejection, a solar storm, hits us while the shield is compromised like this, it won't just be a caress. It will be a sledgehammer. The probe will be destroyed. He finished and looked around the table. The room was quiet. Carla leaned forward, her hands folded. Eris, this is impressive work, truly, but it's still a theory. You're showing us a vibration we can't yet see any physical damage from. You're asking us to change the entire mission profile, to use precious fuel, based on the possibility of what a future solar storm might do. A man from the budget committee, who had joined via video call, spoke next. Dr. Thorne, what you're proposing would cost us the final 2 orbital maneuvers. We would lose our closest approach to the sun. The public, Congress, they funded this mission for that headline. Humanity touches the sun. We can't abandon that because of a shiver. Another senior engineer, a friend of Eris's for 20 years, spoke more gently. Eris, we all remember Jupiter. We know you carry that. But this isn't Jupiter. The Helios Sentinel is the toughest ship we've ever built. You helped make it that way. You have to trust your own work. The words hit Eris like a physical blow. This wasn't about the data anymore. It was about him. They saw him as a haunted man still chasing the ghost of his past failure. He tried one more time, his voice tight. It's not about Jupiter. It's about the Sentinel, please. A small course correction now could save the entire mission later. Carla's face was full of sympathy, but her decision was firm. The answer is no, Eris. The mission continues as planned. The risk of action is greater than the risk of inaction. That's my final call. The meeting was over. As people filed out, they gave him kind smiles and pats on the shoulder, but their eyes said everything. They thought he was losing his edge. He was the brilliant scientist who had started to see problems where none existed. He walked back to his station, the hope he'd felt completely gone, replaced by a cold, heavy certainty. He was not just being sidelined. He was being shut out. He looked at the live feed of the sun. It was calm today, a serene ball of light, but he knew its temper. He knew the storms that boiled beneath its surface. He had spent his life studying its beauty and its rage, and now he felt a strange connection to it. He felt like he was the only one listening to its quiet, dangerous song. While everyone else was just watching the pretty light show, he was the unheeded prophet. And his prophecy was written in the silent, shaking data of a probe flying bravely into a danger it was never designed to survive. The days after the meeting felt different for Eris. It was as if a glass wall had descended between him and the rest of the mission control room. He was on one side and everyone else was on the other. He could see them, hear them, but he couldn't truly connect. The team's energy was high, focused on the incredible success of the mission. The Helios Sentinel was sending back breathtaking images and data that were already changing science. To them, Eris's worries were a small dark cloud on an otherwise perfectly sunny day, and they had simply chosen to fly around it. His work became solitary. Carla, while not unkind, had gently reassigned him. He was no longer in charge of monitoring the shield's real-time integrity. Instead, he was given long-term data analysis. Important work, but work that felt like it was for the history books, not for the probe's survival. It was a way to keep the brilliant Dr. Thorne busy without letting him disrupt the main operation. He spent his hours in the back of the control room, at a terminal that wasn't part of the main network. He watched the team from a distance. He saw Ben, the young engineer, who would sometimes glance his way with an apologetic look before quickly turning back to his console. Ben believed him, Eris could tell, but the young man was not in a position to challenge the entire mission hierarchy. One evening, Eris found himself alone in the office with Ben. The younger man was working late, and Eris was, as usual, avoiding his empty house. "You know, I don't think you're crazy, Dr. Thorne," Ben said suddenly, breaking the silence. Eris looked up from his screen, surprised. "Most people do, Ben." "It's not that," Ben said, swiveling in his chair. "It's just, the evidence isn't solid enough for them. They need to see a crack. They need a fire alarm to be ringing, not just the smell of smoke. And by the time we see the crack," Eris replied quietly, "it will be too late." Ben nodded, looking troubled. "I know." This small moment of belief was a comfort, but it was a tiny flame in a very cold room. It didn't change his reality. He was now a ghost in the machine of his own life's work. At home, the silence felt heavier, more accusing. He would talk to Lena's photograph, a habit he had developed since she passed. "They think I'm seeing things, Lena," he said one night, holding a cold cup of tea. "They think the past has broken my judgment." He looked at her smiling face, frozen in time. She had always been his anchor, the one who could calm the storms in his mind. He remembered a time years ago when he had been obsessed with a complex physics problem, working day and night, growing more and more frustrated. "You're trying to force the river." "Eris," she had told him, placing a hand on his tense shoulder. Sometimes you have to step back and just let the water flow. The answer will come. He wished he could step back now. He wished he could just let the mission flow and believe everything would be fine. But he couldn't. This wasn't a math problem. It was a countdown to a disaster. Back in mission control, the atmosphere was like a party. They had achieved the closest approach. News channels were running stories about the Helio Sentinel touching the sun. There were congratulations from NASA headquarters. Carla Rossi gave a speech and the team cheered. Aris stood at the back and clapped politely, a tight fake smile on his face. He felt like an actor in a play where everyone knew their lines except him. He started to doubt himself. Was he just a tired old man? Was the ghost of the Jupiter failure truly haunting him, making him imagine problems where there were none? He lay awake at night, the wobble on the graph imprinted on the back of his eyelids. Bump, bump. Pause. Bump. He began to look for any other explanation, any piece of data that could prove him wrong. He wanted to be wrong. He desperately wanted to be the crazy old prophet so the mission could be saved. But every simulation he ran, every line of code he checked, led him back to the same terrifying conclusion. The stress began to wear him down. He wasn't sleeping. He forgot to eat. The mess in his house grew, reflecting the chaos in his mind. He was a man trapped in a nightmare, screaming a warning that no one could hear. Then it happened. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Aris was at his isolated terminal, running another futile simulation when a soft but urgent alarm chimed through the control room. It wasn't a loud, blaring siren. It was a polite, terrifying beep that meant one thing. The sun had spoken. Every screen in the room flickered and changed to display data from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, a satellite that watched the sun. A massive, dark sunspot group, which they had been monitoring for days, had finally erupted on the screen. A colossal plume of fire, a coronal mass ejection, billions of tons of superheated plasma and magnetic field, slowly, gracefully detached itself from the sun's surface. It was beautiful. A flower of unimaginable power blooming in the void. The room, which had been buzzing with casual conversation, fell into a dead, cold silence. The lead solar physicist spoke, his voice cracking slightly. CME confirmed. Class X-28. It was one of the largest ever recorded. He paused, typing frantically, and then delivered the final, devastating blow. Trajectory analysis complete. He looked up, his face pale. It's on a direct intercept course with the Helio Sentinel's position. Estimated impact, 36 hours. For a single frozen second, no one moved. No one spoke. All the celebrations, all the congratulations, all the confident decisions evaporated in that moment. Then every single head in the room, as if pulled by the same string, turned. They didn't look at the mission director, Carla Rossi. They didn't look at the senior engineers. They all turned and looked to the back of the room. They looked at Dr. Aris Thorn. He wasn't looking back at them. His eyes were fixed on the screen, on the magnificent and deadly storm racing towards his probe. There was no "I told you so" in his expression, no anger. There was only a profound, bone-deep sorrow. The prophet was no longer unheeded. But as he had feared, it was too late. The fire alarm was ringing and the flames were already on the horizon. The silence in the control room was the loudest sound Aris had ever heard. It was a heavy, crushing weight made of shock, fear, and the unspoken words, "You were right." All eyes were on him. He could feel them, hot and expectant, but his own eyes were locked on the main screen. The coronal mass ejection bloomed on the display like a time-lapse of a poisonous flower, its tendrils of plasma stretching out into the blackness, reaching for his probe. For his creation, he didn't feel vindicated. He felt sick. The "I told you so" was a hollow, bitter taste in his mouth. Being right meant the Helio Sentinel was going to die. Carla Rossi was the first to break the spell. Her voice, usually so confident, was tight with strain. "Okay, people. We have 36 hours. I want every system on the Sentinel double and triple checked. I want trajectory models now. I want to know if we have any room to maneuver." The room exploded into a controlled chaos. Chairs rolled, keyboards clacked, voices rose in urgent calls. Aris finally moved. He stood up from his isolated terminal and walked slowly to the main floor. The team parted for him, a sea of worried young faces looking to him for an answer he didn't have. He stopped at Carla's station. She looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment he saw the real fear in her eyes, stripped of all her professional authority. "Eris," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." He just gave a small, stiff nod. There was no time for apologies. "What are our options?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady. A senior propulsion engineer, a man named David, answered, his face grim. "There aren't many. We can fire the main engines, try to move it out of the direct path. But the CME is massive. It's like trying to dodge a tsunami in a rowboat. The shockwave alone will be enormous, and the fuel burn would likely end the mission anyway, even if it survived." Another voice chimed in from the communications team. "And if we change its attitude or turn it, we risk exposing a more vulnerable side. The heat shield is our only hope, but according to..." She trailed off, not wanting to say it. "According to Dr. Thorne, the shield is already compromised." The unspoken words hung in the air. The gentle caress had been slowly weakening the Sentinel's armor for weeks. The coming storm wouldn't be a caress. It would be a full-force punch against a shield that was already cracked. Eris walked away from the group, his mind racing, trying to push past the wall of fear. He went to a quiet corner where a whiteboard stood, covered in old happy calculations from the early mission days. He erased a section with his sleeve. The marker dust smelling like a forgotten past, he started to draw. He drew the sun. He drew the Helio Sentinel with its large dish-shaped heat shield facing the star, and he drew the approaching cloud of plasma, a massive, messy blob. The team continued their frantic work behind him, but their efforts felt like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. The models confirmed it. A direct engine burn wouldn't move it enough. Hunkering down behind the shield was their best bet, but with the microscopic fractures, it was a bet they were likely to lose. Eris stared at the drawing. He thought about the problem not as an engineer, but as a scientist who had spent his life understanding the sun's nature. The plasma in a CME wasn't a solid wall. It was a cloud of charged particles, a soup of electricity guided by magnetic fields. You couldn't stop it. You couldn't outrun it, but could you guide it? A memory flickered in his mind. Years ago, he'd been on a boat with Lena on a windy lake. To change direction, you didn't just paddle harder. You tilted the sail. You used the wind itself, you danced with it. The Helio Sentinel didn't have a sail, but it had something else. He turned around, his heart starting to beat faster. "The communications array," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. The room quieted. Everyone looked at him. "The main antenna," Eris continued, walking back to the group. "It's a large metallic dish. And the science magnetometers on the booms, they have their own small power sources." David, the propulsion engineer, looked confused. "What about them?" "We can't fight the storm," Eris said, his eyes alight with a new, desperate energy. "So we don't, we dance with it. We use the antenna and the magnetometers to create a weak, localized magnetic field. A bubble. We don't try to block the plasma. We try to deflect it. We make the Sentinel slippery. We let the solar wind slide around us." The room was silent for a moment, processing this. It was insane. That's not what any of those systems were designed for, David said, skepticism written all over his face. The power required would fry the comm system. "We'd be left deaf and blind, and if we don't, we'll be dead," Eris shot back, his calm finally breaking. "This isn't about saving the mission anymore, David. It's about saving the probe from being vaporized. We are not trying to have a perfect outcome. We are trying to have any outcome other than total failure." He turned to Carla. The wobble, the vibration. It was the key. It showed us how the solar wind interacts with our magnetic profile. We can use that data. We can turn our weakness into our strength. We can program a sequence, a dance, that uses the probe's own instrumentation to create a shield the storm wasn't expecting. Carla looked from Eris's desperate, hopeful face to the screens showing the unstoppable storm. She saw the dead ends in all the conventional plans. She saw the ghost of mission failure looming over all of them. She made a decision. "Do it," she said, her voice firm now. "Eris, you have the con. This is your plan. Everyone, you report to Dr. Thorne. Whatever he needs, you get it for him. We have," she checked the clock, 35 hours and 12 minutes. The weight of the entire mission, the billion-dollar probe, the years of work, the eyes of the world, now settled squarely on Eris's shoulders. The ghost was no longer in the machine. He was its only chance at an exorcism. He wasn't the unheeded prophet in the wilderness anymore. He was the captain of a ship heading into a hurricane, and he had just proposed building a new sail out of spare parts while the storm was already on the horizon. The moment Carla gave the command, the control room transformed. The frantic energy focused into a single laser-sharp beam aimed at Eris Thorne. He was no longer a ghost in the corner. He was the heart of the operation, and the room beat with his pulse. For a second, he froze. The weight was immense. He felt the eyes of his colleagues, the ghost of Lena, the memory of the Jupiter failure, all watching him. He took a deep breath, and as he let it out, he let the doubt go with it. There was no room for it now. "Okay," he said, his voice gaining a strength that surprised even him. "Ben, with me. We're riding the dance." He moved to the main command terminal, Ben scrambling to a station beside him. The dance was what he had started calling it in his head. It was a sequence of precise timed movements and power surges for the probe. "First," Eris said, his fingers flying across the keyboard, "we need to map the storm. We have to know its magnetic structure, its density. We can't deflect what we don't understand." Across the room, the solar physicists were already on it, feeding him live data from other satellites. The CME was a complex beast, a twisting knot of magnetic fields. It wasn't a simple wave. It was a labyrinth. Eris and Ben started writing code. It wasn't elegant, beautiful programming. It was a patchwork, a digital Frankenstein's monster. They were taking commands from the communication system software and stitching them together with power management protocols from the science instruments. "We'll pulse the magnetometers on the booms," Eris muttered, more to himself than to Ben. "A quick, strong burst, then off. Then we'll angle the main antenna, use its large surface area to create a broader, weaker field. We have to alternate, create a rhythm. The power draw will be enormous," Ben warned, his face lit by the screen. "If we pull too much from the main bus, we'll trigger a safe mode shutdown. The probe will just go to sleep right before the storm hits." "Then we walk a tightrope," Eris said, his eyes never leaving the lines of code. "We have to balance the power between keeping the probe alive and creating our magnetic bubble. We have to be a sip, not a gulp." Hours slipped by. Coffee cups piled up on desks. The pizza that was ordered sat in untouched boxes. The air grew thick with concentration and a faint smell of sweat. Eris's back ached and his vision blurred, but he pushed on. He was no longer a 60-year-old man with a bad back. He was a conduit for a single desperate idea. He delegated tasks. He sent a team to run simulations on a separate server, testing their patchwork code against digital models of the storm. The first results came back: failure. The simulated probe was torn apart. "Not enough power in the antenna pulse," Eris called out. "Increase it by 5%, but delay the magnetometer burst by 0.2 seconds. We need to create a wave, not a single push." They tried again. "Another failure. The timing is wrong," a young woman from the simulation team reported, her voice strained. "The plasma cloud is too turbulent. Our bubble collapses." Eris felt a wave of despair. It was like trying to build a sandcastle as the tide was coming in. Every time they built one wall, another was washed away. He stood up, his joints cracking, and walked to the bathroom. He splashed cold water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, a tired old man with deep circles under his eyes. "You're trying to force the river, Eris." Lena's voice echoed in his memory. He wasn't listening to the river. He was fighting it. He was trying to build a perfect, rigid shield, but the solar wind wasn't rigid. It was fluid, chaotic. His dance couldn't be a stiff military march. It had to be a real dance. It had to flow. He walked back into the control room, a new idea forming. "Scrap the rigid sequence," he announced. "We make it adaptive." The team looked at him, confused. "We program a listening algorithm," Eris explained, his excitement growing. "The probe has its own magnetic field sensors. We teach it to feel the storm. When it senses a strong push from one direction, it pulses the opposite magnetometer to push back. When the pressure eases, it rests. It won't be a pre-programmed dance. It will be an improvisation. The probe will be dancing with the storm, partner to partner." It was a brilliant, terrifying leap. They were asking the probe's computer, with its limited processing power, to become a partner in its own survival. The final hours were a blur of non-stop work. Eris and Ben, with help from the entire software team, wrote and rewrote the adaptive code. They ran simulation after simulation. The failure rate began to drop. They weren't building a wall anymore. They were teaching the Sentinel how to sway. With 4 hours to go until the storm's edge reached the probe, the code was ready. It was the best they could do. Uploading the dance protocol now, Ben said, his finger hovering over the enter key. He pressed it. A progress bar appeared on the main screen. The data, a stream of ones and zeros representing their desperate hope, began its long journey across millions of miles of empty space, racing to reach the Helios Sentinel before the storm did. The room watched in silence. No one celebrated. There was nothing to celebrate yet. They had built their lifeboat in the dark. Now they had to wait and see if it would float when the hurricane hit. Eris slowly sat down, the adrenaline draining from his body, leaving him utterly exhausted. He had done all he could. He had given the probe a fighting chance. Now it was up to the Sentinel itself and the mercy of the star it was built to touch. The dance was choreographed. The music was about to begin. The data finished its long journey. A simple green transmission successful message flashed on the screen. A soft, collective sigh of relief passed through the control room. But it was a short-lived one. The hardest part was just beginning. The wait. For the next 2 hours, a strange, quiet tension filled the space. The frantic typing and shouted commands were over. Now there was only silence and the slow, cruel tick of the clock on the wall. The Helios Sentinel was on its own. It had received the new instructions, and its computer was now running the dance protocol. There was nothing more anyone on Earth could do. People sat at their stations, staring at their screens. Some sipped cold coffee. Others just leaned back in their chairs, eyes closed, trying to rest but unable to. The live feed from the solar observatory still showed the CME, a silent, beautiful monster creeping across the screen. It didn't look dangerous from here. It looked like a painting. Eris didn't move from his chair. He felt numb. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his stomach, but he was too tired to feel its sharp edges anymore. He watched the data stream from the Sentinel. It was still nominal. The probe was healthy, unaware of the doom rushing towards it. Ben brought him a sandwich. "You should eat, Dr. Thorne." Eris looked at it as if he'd never seen food before. He nodded a thanks but didn't touch it. His stomach was a tight knot. He thought about the probe. He pictured it out there, all alone in the immense blackness, a tiny human-made object, a speck of dust facing a stellar hurricane. He had helped design every bolt, every circuit. He knew its heart and soul. It wasn't just a machine to him. It was a piece of his life, a piece of all their lives hurled into the void. Carla Rossi came and stood beside him. She didn't say anything for a long time. They just watched the data stream together. "I never should have dismissed you, Eris," she said quietly, so only he could hear. It was arrogant. "I was so focused on the success story I didn't listen to the scientist." Eris kept his eyes on the screen. "It doesn't matter now, Carla. We all want the same thing." "But it does matter," she insisted. "You are the only one truly seeing the sun for what it is. Not a postcard, but a living, breathing force." Her words were kind, but they didn't comfort him. Praise felt meaningless when the object of their life's work was moments from being destroyed. The final 30 minutes felt like a year. Someone had a small radio on, playing soft classical music. It was supposed to be calming, but the slow, sad notes just made the atmosphere heavier. The head of the mission, a man who rarely showed emotion, had started pacing slowly behind the rows of consoles. Eris found his mind drifting back to Lena. He remembered a terrible thunderstorm they had experienced once. Huddled together on their porch, watching the lightning tear the sky. She hadn't been afraid. She had been in awe. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" she had said. To see so much power. He felt that now. A terrible, respectful awe for the raw power of the universe. 10 minutes to initial contact, the solar physicist announced, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. The music was switched off. The pacing stopped. Every person in the room sat up straight, their eyes glued to their monitors. The air was so thick it was hard to breathe. Oris leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. This was it. The dance was about to begin. 5 minutes, he could see the data from the Sentinel's own external sensors. The ambient magnetic field was beginning to fluctuate. The solar wind was picking up. The gentle breeze was turning into a gale. 1 minute, Eris closed his eyes. He didn't realize he was holding his breath. Initial contact. Now. For a second, nothing happened. The data stream continued, normal and steady. Had they been wrong? Had the storm missed them? Then it hit. The data on the screens exploded into chaos. The temperature readings spiked violently. The magnetic field graph went wild, scribbling jagged, insane lines. Alarms that had been silent for the entire mission now flashed red and screamed their electronic warnings. The Helios Sentinel was screaming. Eris's eyes were wide open now, fixed on the telemetry. He could see the dance protocol activating. He could see the power being rerouted, the magnetometers pulsing, the antenna shifting its angle. The probe was fighting. It was dancing, but the storm was so much stronger than they had imagined. The shield. The external temperature is exceeding design limits. An engineer yelled, his voice shaking. Power fluctuations in the main bus. The dance is drawing too much. Structural integrity alarm. The vibrations are extreme. The control room was a symphony of panic. Each new alarm was a note of disaster. They were watching their patient die on the operating table. Eris watched, helpless, as the numbers climbed into the red. The probe was being battered, shaken, cooked alive. He saw the power levels in the main battery plummet as the dance protocol fought to keep the magnetic bubble stable. It was a losing battle. Then the most dreaded alert of all appeared on the main screen. In bold red letters, carrier signal lost, the constant, steady heartbeat of the probe, the signal that told them it was still alive. Still talking was gone. The screaming alarm seemed to fade into a dull roar. The frantic voices fell silent. The data stream from the Helios Sentinel stopped completely. The screen was frozen on the last, chaotic set of numbers it had sent. The main display, which had shown the vibrant, living data of the probe for so long, was now a flat, empty gray. The storm was still raging out there, but in the control room, there was only a deafening, absolute silence. The dance was over. The music had stopped. The Helios Sentinel was gone. The silence in the control room was not just an absence of sound. It was a presence. It was heavy and cold, and it pressed down on everyone, making it hard to breathe. The frantic red alarms on the screens were the only things moving, a cruel, blinking memorial to what had just been lost. For a full minute, no one spoke. No one moved. They were all statues of shock and grief. A young woman at a navigation console put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking silently. Another engineer simply stared at his blank screen, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. The mission was over. Eris didn't move. He remained in his chair, leaning forward, his clasped hands now pressed against his forehead. He watched the gray, lifeless screen where the Helios Sentinel's data had once flowed. He had seen the last moments, the violent screaming data, the desperate struggle. He had felt it die. It was like watching a vital sign monitor for a loved one flatline. He had given it a dance, and the storm had snapped its legs. Slowly, the room began to stir back to a painful life. Carla Rossi was the first to break. She took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up. Her face was pale, but her voice was firm, the voice of a captain going down with her ship. "All right, everyone," she said, the words echoing in the quiet room. "Initiate the loss of signal protocol." She couldn't bring herself to say the word failure. The team moved slowly, like people in a dream. They began the sad technical rituals of death. They started logging the final data. They began securing systems. The work was mechanical, done without heart. The celebration of just days ago felt like a memory from another lifetime. No one looked at Eris. What could they say? "You tried?" It was a hollow comfort. He had tried and he had failed. The ghost of Jupiter had returned, this time on his watch, with his plan. Ben came and stood beside him. "Dr. Thorne," he began, his voice thick with emotion. Eris just shook his head, still not looking up. He couldn't bear to see the sympathy in the young man's eyes. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted his probe back. He finally pushed himself up from the chair. His body felt 100 years old. Every joint ached with a deep, cold fatigue. He didn't say a word to anyone. He just walked slowly and deliberately out of the control room. The hallway outside was bright and empty. The cheerful posters about solar science on the walls felt like a mockery. He walked out of the building into the early morning air. The sun was just beginning to rise in the sky, the same sun that had just destroyed his life's work. He drove home through a world that seemed utterly normal. People were going to work, getting coffee, living their lives. The universe hadn't shifted for them. But for Eris, it felt like everything had ended. He walked into his dark, silent house. The emptiness he had grown used to now felt absolute. He didn't turn on the lights. He went straight to the mantelpiece and looked at the photograph of Lena. Her smiling face, forever frozen in a moment of happiness, was too much to bear. He looked away, his eyes falling on a small framed sketch on the wall. It was a preliminary design for the Helio Sentinel's heat shield, drawn by his own hand 20 years ago. It was the seed of the dream. A sob, raw and unexpected, broke from his chest. He didn't cry for the lost data or the scientific setback. He cried for the dream. He cried for the thousands of days and nights of work, for the brilliant minds who had come together, for the sheer, beautiful audacity of wanting to touch a star. He cried for the little piece of human courage that was now scattered atoms in the solar wind. He sank into his armchair, the same one he sat in every night, and let the darkness swallow him. He didn't sleep. He just sat there, replaying the final moments in his head. Had there been something else? A different sequence? A stronger pulse? The questions circled in his mind like vultures. Back at NASA, the team continued their grim work. The press office was preparing a statement. The world would soon know that the Helio Sentinel was lost. The story of triumph would be rewritten as a tragedy. Carla Rossi sat in her office, the door closed. She stared at a model of the solar system on her desk. She picked up the tiny, delicate model of the Helio Sentinel, a speck of plastic representing a billion-dollar dream. She held it in her palm for a long time, then gently put it back in its place, orbiting a plastic sun. The hope was gone. The human spirit had thrown its best technology at the universe, and the universe had quite simply swatted it away. For everyone involved, the sunrise that morning didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like an ending. The dance was over, and the dancer was gone. Eris spent the next day in a fog. He didn't go back to NASA. He called Carla and, in a voice rough with exhaustion, told her he wouldn't be in. She understood. He moved through his house like a ghost, not eating, not sleeping, just existing in the crushing silence of failure. The news had broken. The headlines were everywhere. Helio Sentinel lost. Solar storm destroys NASA probe. He didn't read them. He didn't need to. He had lived it. He found himself in his small home office, a room filled with books and stacks of paper. His eyes fell on a thick binder. It was the original proposal for the Helio Sentinel. He opened it. The first page was a simple, powerful statement. To journey where no spacecraft has gone before, to feel the breath of our star, and to return its secrets to humanity. They had achieved the first part. They had journeyed. They had felt the breath, but they had returned nothing. The secrets were lost. He closed the binder. The ambition of it now felt foolish, arrogant even. Back at Mission Control, the mood was funereal. The team was officially standing down. Most people had been sent home to rest. The main control room was dark, the consoles powered off. It was a tomb for a dream. Only a skeleton crew remained, their job one of sad duty. They were tasked with maintaining a listening vigil. It was standard procedure. They would keep the massive deep space network antennas pointed at the Helio Sentinel's last known position, listening for any signal, any whisper, for another 48 hours. It was a formality, a final act of respect before declaring the probe officially dead. No one expected to hear anything. The violence of the storm had been too great. Ben was part of the skeleton crew. He couldn't sleep anyway. He sat at a secondary station, a headset on, watching a screen that showed the signal strength from the listening antennas. The line was flat, empty static. The silence was a confirmation of their loss. He thought about Eris alone in his house. He thought about the crazy, brilliant plan they had built together. The dance protocol. Had it done anything? Had it given the probe a few extra seconds? Had it been enough to save any part of it? He sighed, sipping his coffee. It was cold. He looked at the clock. They had been listening for over 30 hours. The official vigil would end at the 48-hour mark tomorrow morning. Then, it would truly be over. Eris was woken from a fitful sleep on his armchair by the buzzing of his phone. He fumbled for it. It was Ben. His first thought was that it was a courtesy call to inform him the vigil was ending. He answered, his voice a dry croak. "Ben, Dr. Thorne." Ben's voice was strange, tight, not sad, but tense. "Are you watching the feed?" "What feed?" Eris asked, rubbing his eyes. The room was dark. It was the middle of the night. The DSN feed, the listening post. You should look." There was something in Ben's voice, a tremor, a sliver of something that wasn't grief. Eris's heart, which had felt like a stone in his chest, gave a single hard thump. He stood up, his old body protesting, and went to his home computer. With clumsy fingers, he logged into the secure NASA server. It was slow. It felt like an eternity. Finally, he pulled up the live data feed from the Deep Space Network. It was the same screen Ben was watching, a graph of signal strength over time. For the past day and a half, it had been a flat green line, hovering just above zero, the sound of empty space. But now the line wasn't flat, it was trembling. There was a pulse. A tiny, almost invisible bump in the line. Then it fell back to zero. Eris leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't believe it. It was probably interference. A blip from Earth, a mistake. He watched. Seconds ticked by. Nothing. Then, another bump. A little stronger this time. A small rhythmic peak bump, silence, bump. It was faint. It was weak. But it was there. It was a pattern. Over the headset, he could hear Ben's voice whispering now as if he was afraid to scare the signal away. "Do you see it?" "Dr. Thorne, please tell me you see it." Eris couldn't speak. He could only watch. The bumps grew slightly more regular. The signal strength began to climb. No longer a flat line, but a series of gentle, rolling hills on the screen. Then, the computer at the listening post, programmed to recognize the Helios Sentinel's unique carrier signal, automatically triggered an alert. A soft chime, different from the screaming alarms of the storm, sounded from Eris's computer speakers. A small box popped up on his screen. Signal reacquired, Helios Sentinel carrier wave locked, telemetry synchronizing. The words glowed on the screen, bright and impossible. Eris slowly reached out a trembling hand and touched the monitor, as if he could touch the words themselves, to make sure they were real. Back in the dark mission control, Ben was no longer sitting. He was standing, both hands pressed to his headset, his eyes wide with disbelief. He turned to the other two people in the room who were staring at their own screens, their faces frozen in shock. "It's her," Ben said, his voice breaking into a sob that was also a laugh. "She's back. She's calling home." The news spread like an electric shock. Phones started ringing. Lights flickered on in the empty offices around mission control. Carla Rossi, who had been lying awake in her bed, got the call. She didn't even say hello. She just heard the breathless, joyful voice on the other end, and she was running, still in her pajamas, for her car. Eris Thorne remained at his computer, the cool glow of the screen lighting his face in the dark room. Tears, which had not come in his moment of deepest grief, now streamed down his cheeks freely. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a hope so fierce it was painful. The dancer hadn't been destroyed. It had been lost in the music, and now it had found its way back to the rhythm. The silence was over. The faint, steady pulse from a million miles away was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. The signal was back. But the celebration was nervous, like doctors gathered around a patient who had just returned from the brink of death. The Helios Sentinel was alive, but what condition was it in? By the time Eris arrived back at NASA, the control room was buzzing again, but the energy was different from the frantic panic before the storm. It was a focused, gentle hum of care and caution. The main lights were still dimmed, as if a loud noise might scare the fragile signal away. Carla Rossi, her hair messy and wearing a jacket over her pajamas, stood at the center of it all. She gave Eris a look that held an entire conversation: apology, respect, and shared trembling hope. He gave a small nod in return. There would be time for words later. Ben was at his station, his face lit with a huge, goofy grin. "Carrier wave is strong and steady," he reported. "We have a solid lock." "Begin a full system diagnostic," Carla ordered, her voice calm but firm. "But gently. One system at a time. No sudden power draws. We don't know how hurt she is." The data started to trickle in, and the picture it painted was both miraculous and grim. "Primary communications array is offline," an engineer reported, "probably fried by the power surges during the dance. That's why we lost the signal. Attitude control is responding, but slowly. The reaction wheels are stressed. Several external science instruments are damaged or gone. She's banged up." Each report was a reminder of the brutal beating the probe had taken. It was a survivor, but it was scarred. Then the lead systems engineer, a woman named Anya, spoke up. her voice filled with wonder. "But the core is intact. The main computer, the memory banks, the power bus, they're all online, and the heat shield it held." A collective breath was released. The heart and brain of the Sentinel had survived. Their dance had worked. Eris's desperate, crazy plan had created just enough of a magnetic bubble to deflect the worst of the storm, protecting the probe's vital organs even as its limbs were battered. "Now," Eris said, his voice cutting through the relieved chatter. "The data. What about the data from the storm?" This was the crucial question. The probe's survival was a miracle, but the mission was to bring back knowledge. Had it recorded its own near-death experience? Anya typed furiously. "The primary data recorder it's full. It was recording right up until the moment we lost contact, and it's been recording ever since it rebooted." "Can we access it?" Carla asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Downloading now. It's a massive file. The storm data it's petabytes of information." They waited again, but this wait was filled with a thrilling anticipation. They were waiting for a message from the other side of a hurricane. The first images came through. They were not from the main camera, which was likely destroyed, but from a secondary, hardened lens. The screen flickered and then displayed a view from inside the storm. The room gasped. It was chaos. A view of pure, white-hot fury. The sun wasn't a distant ball of light. It was everything. A raging ocean of fire that filled the entire universe. Particles streaked past the lens like a blizzard of light. It was terrifying and beautiful beyond words. Then the science data started to parse. Graphs and numbers flooded the screens. The team of solar physicists who had been quietly observing suddenly rushed to their stations, their professional calm shattered by disbelief. "These magnetic field readings," one of them stammered. "This is impossible. We've never seen turbulence at this scale. This close. The way the plasma is structured. The models. They're all wrong. This data. It's rewriting everything we know about coronal mass ejections." Eris walked over to their station, looking over their shoulders. The numbers were insane. They showed the precise moment the dance protocol had activated. They showed the magnetic bubble forming, the plasma sliding around it, the intense focused pockets of energy that would have vaporized the probe without the dance. He had been right. Not just about the flaw, but about the solution. They hadn't just survived by luck. They had survived because they had learned to dance. Ben called out, his voice shaking with excitement. "The dance protocol log is intact. The probe recorded its own actions. It adapted, just like you designed it to, Eris." When the pressure spiked on the port side, it pulsed the starboard magnetometer. It felt the storm and it responded. It really did dance. The mood in the room transformed completely. The grief and failure of the previous day were washed away by a tidal wave of triumphant, glorious success. They hadn't just saved a probe. They had ventured into the heart of a stellar hell and brought back a treasure chest of secrets. The Helio Sentinel was more than a survivor. It was a hero. It had endured the unendurable and returned with a gift for all of humanity. A new understanding of the star that gave them life. Aris stood in the middle of the celebration, a quiet smile finally touching his lips. He looked at the screens, at the impossible data, at the faces of his colleagues filled with joy and awe. The ghost of Jupiter was gone, forever banished by this greater, harder-won victory. He had set out to touch the sun, and in a way he never imagined, he had. He had felt its wrath, learned its rhythm, and against all odds had lived to tell the tale. The mission was not over. It had just become legendary. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the Helio Sentinel's survival was the kind of miracle the world desperately needed. News channels didn't just report it. They celebrated it. The probe was called the Unbreakable and humanity's little engine that could. Eris Thorne, however, was not at the center of the media storm. He gave one press conference standing beside a beaming Carla Rossi and a proud young Ben. He was calm and humble, deflecting praise onto his team and the incredible toughness of the machine they had built. He explained the dance protocol in simple terms, calling it a conversation with the storm. The world was captivated. But when the cameras left, Eris felt a deep need for quiet. The mission was now in a new phase, a long, successful golden age of downloading the priceless storm data and operating the battered but resilient probe from a safe distance. The intense pressure was gone. The battle was won. One evening, a few months after the storm, he found himself back in his garden. It was a cool, clear night. The frantic chaos of the control room felt a million miles away. He held a glass of wine, something he hadn't truly enjoyed in years. The sharp, sweet taste felt like a small celebration just for him. He looked up. The sky was a deep, velvety blue dotted with stars. His eyes, as they always did, found the brightest point of light in the western sky. It wasn't a star. It was Venus. But in his mind's eye, he didn't see Venus. He saw the Helios Sentinel. He knew it was out there, millions of miles away, silently orbiting, its work done, its story told. He felt a profound sense of peace. The grief for Lena was still there, a quiet companion, but it no longer had sharp edges. It felt more like a warm memory now, a soft sadness mixed with gratitude for the time they had. He realized that in fighting for the probe, in facing his greatest fear and failure, he had somehow made peace with his own past. He wasn't just a widower anymore. He wasn't just a scientist haunted by old mistake. He was a man who had looked into the heart of the sun, both in the sky and in his own soul, and had not been burned. He had been tempered, made stronger. The next day he went to the office. It was bustling, but with a happy, productive energy. He walked over to Ben's station. The young man was now a lead engineer on the Sentinel's extended mission, his confidence grown immensely. "Ben," Eris said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "I have a project for you." "Anything, Dr. Thorne," Ben said, turning with a smile. "I want you to take the lead on writing the paper for the dance protocol. Your name goes first." Ben's eyes widened. "What? No, Eris, that was your idea. Your algorithm." "It was our algorithm," Eris corrected gently, "and you understood it as well as I did. You're the future of this, Ben. It's your turn to teach the next generation. I'll be here to help, but this is your work now." Ben was speechless, his respect for the older man deepening in a way he couldn't express. Eris wasn't just handing him credit. He was handing him a legacy. Eris then walked to Carla's office. Her door was open. She was on the phone, but she waved him in. When she hung up, she smiled. That was headquarters. They want to fund a Helios Sentinel 2. They're calling it the Resilience class. Eris smiled back. It was the best possible outcome. "That's wonderful news, Carla." She looked at him, her head tilted. "You'll be heading the design team, of course." Eris shook his head. "No, I don't think I will." Carla looked surprised. "Eris, this is your life's work." "It was," he said calmly. "And I'm proud of it. But my part in this dance is over. It's time for new minds, new ideas. I'll be an advisor, a consultant, but I want to spend my days in the quiet, looking at the data we already have. There are lifetimes of discovery in that storm data. That's where I belong now." Carla understood. She saw the peace in his eyes. He had reached the summit of his mountain, and he was happy to let others climb the next one. That night, Aris went home to his house. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like his home. He put on some soft music, the same classical station that had been on during the long wait for the storm. This time the music didn't sound sad. It sounded beautiful. He went to the mantelpiece and picked up the photograph of Lena. He looked at her smiling face. "We did it, Lena," he whispered. "We finally learned to dance." He placed the photo back gently. Then he went to his desk, opened his laptop, and began to scroll through the breathtaking, chaotic data from the heart of the solar storm. He wasn't working. He wasn't fighting. He was simply appreciating the magnificent, powerful, and beautiful universe he was a part of. The Helios Sentinel had completed its mission. And so in his own way had Dr. Eris Thorne. The sun was no longer a problem to be solved or a danger to be feared. It was a partner in a silent, eternal, and beautiful waltz, and for the first time in a very long time, he was perfectly happy to just listen to the music.